The most remarkable aspect is I think the strange paradox that has emerged between what you've described as clearly a force that has transformed humanity over the last few hundred years, which is this capitalist system, and the sense with which even people going to the high altar of capitalism, Harvard Business School, look at it and say it's run awry. The question to put is, when did it come off the rails? And what took it off those rails?
We forgot. We forgot that capitalism is not just the free market unchecked. We forgot that a healthy, prosperous society has three solid foundations. One is the free market and all the power that comes from that. But the other two are a strong, democratically accountable government and a strong civil society, a voice for labor, independent judiciary, and a free media. And that we need these three actors to be in tension with each other in order to ensure that capitalism unchecked doesn't run us off the rails. After all, if you say to a capitalist, your only job is to make money, they will cheerfully look around and say, well, why not subvert the legislature? I mean, why don't I just write the rules in my own favor? That's a nice, easy way to make money, but it's not quite what we have in mind when we talk about capitalism. Yeah. If we have no controls on, for example, carbon pollution, then that's not a free market in the sense of the textbooks. The prices are badly out of whack. We have a major externality that's unpriced. If labor is so shattered and so weak that it cannot be at the table with capital, we'll see an increasing share of income go to capital and returns to labor fall and fall and fall. We had something like this in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. There are places on the globe which still look more like this. But in the US and the UK in particular, we went free market all in.
This observation that you've made about the returns going to capital rather than labor is something that we've seen in every one of the top 20 economies in the world over the last 50 years. I think the one exception was Russia, which is not the exemplar that we want to draw our minds to. And a lot of this seems to go back to that period at the end of the 1960s and the early 1970s with the Chicago School and Milton Friedman and the arrival of a very clarified statement of the purpose of the corporation, which is to make profits for its shareholders while it plays within the rules of the game. Is it a simplistic reading of history to point to that moment in time, the pivotal moment where business was given a narrative that allowed it to think more monomaniacally about its purpose?
Azeem, you know history isn't that easy. We look back to that publication by Milton Friedman and to Milton Friedman himself and say that's where it happened. But this had been building for years, way back with the Mount Pelerin project in the post-war period, in the gradual sense that managers weren't paying enough attention to their investors, in the increasing awareness of the power of capitalism and a rejection of some of the more overbearing aspects of government. So we're looking at a major intellectual shift that played out over 30, 40, 50 years. And I think what we're seeing now is the realization that while there was a lot of power and insight in that vision, it was inherently limited. And my goodness, we have reached the limits.
I'm curious about those limits. I mean, what's wrong with society coming together and saying, these are the rules that we need to play by, and your job, Mr. or Mrs. Capitalist, is to stay within the rules of the game that talk about your responsibilities to live within the law and not skirt the law and comply with regulations as appropriate. And now, hell for leather, go off and do the thing that we're asking you to do, while there are other parts of society, civil society and the judiciary and the media, that will go off and do the things that we ask of them.
In principle, that would work great. The trouble with that statement in itself is it has no theory of why the other parts of society continue to function and continue to do the roles we've assigned them. So I'm completely with you. If we had a transparent, capable, democratically accountable government that was politically setting the rules around labor and environment, and we had a strong civil society that was making sure everyone was sharing the same facts and there was robust discussion about what we needed, then I would feel pretty comfortable turning to business people and saying, put your head down and make your money. After all, that's what business is good at. I have more than 25 years experience on major boards. A business is a prosperity job creating machine. That's what it's good at. The problem is when the other two parts of society start to wither away or get into trouble, and one part gets too strong. It's the old idea from way back Galbraith, countervailing power. And the trouble is the Chicago schools model of government was radically incomplete. Why would the government stay firm as power and wealth became increasingly concentrated? What was to stop the unbalancing of society?
I remember one of Ronald Reagan's early speeches where he uses the sentence, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, as being the worst words anyone could ever hear. And it's that there's a sense at which even the government turned against itself, turned against its own ability to contribute to society in any meaningful way, except on the frontiers of our national security. And we saw that happen in the UK as well.
It's not in a sense. We had one of the major political parties decide that government was the problem and do everything it could to scale it back, reduce it, make it less efficient, make it less capable. And I mean, I understand the impulse at some level. Paying my taxes is not my favorite thing to do. And everyone in business has run into a regulator that doesn't know what they're doing. The trouble is that doesn't mean we should throw the whole thing out. The idea that you can run a market completely unregulated is ahistorical. Historically, markets and government have always evolved together in parallel. This was the great invention of European liberalism and goes back to the founders in this country. Unchecked money is a problem. You need a strong government to keep things in balance. I think partly the problem is at an individual level, it's rational, right? If I'm a particular business person, why shouldn't I disgovernment, try and get rid of the regulations, push to reduce taxes? That's great for me right now. I lose sight of the collective implications of those individual decisions. And in a sense, what we've done is lose sight of the institutions and ways of behaving that make sure we pay attention to the long term and to the society as a whole.
Now, in the book, and I'll just remind everyone, it's Reimagining Capitalism, you come out with 5 prescriptions for the reimagination. Would you just take us through those? What your treatment for this condition we find ourselves in?
So step 1, business should start to look for opportunities to simultaneously address some of the major problems we face and make money. For example, there's lots of evidence that running a so-called high road human resource system, paying people decently, treating them with dignity and respect, you can make money, make a big difference to many people's lives. Second step, be aware that the purpose of business is not to maximize profits. It's to build a thriving, prosperous and free society, and that you have duties to the institutions that sustain capitalism. Duty number 1, not to actively run down the institutions that sustain capitalism. Third point, firms acting alone are, of course, insufficient to address the problems we face. It's appropriate to cooperate with other firms in your industry or your region to address some of these public goods problems together. Producing many commodities unsustainably is creating brand risk and supply chain risk. So maybe you can join with every other firm, make those risks pre-competitive, do the right thing. Fourth step, because none of this is going to be enough. Fourth step, we need to get the capital markets on board. I talk about rewiring finance. I argue that the financial sector has a strong interest in the stability and long-term health of the economy, and that owners of capital need to start acting on that and push the firms in that portfolio in that direction. And last but not least, business needs to help rebuild government. If the underlying problem is the society is out of balance, business has an active economic interest, plus, I believe, a moral duty rooted in the fundamental normative commitments of capitalism to rebuild that balance.